morning, everyone. So hopefully you all had a great time at Sukkot. If you celebrated Sukkot, I know we are an extremely small group this morning as people are still resting. But Sukkot ends leading up to Sukkot ends the Torah cycle. And so today begins the Torah cycle. We are beginning Genesis. And of course, you guys who have been with us long enough know we alternate books of the Bible. So last year we did not do Genesis. Actually, at this time we were doing the book of Joshua. Because, honestly, Joshua is the last book of the Torah. Otherwise, you end on a cliffhanger. We're not into the land yet. Of course, whose fault was that? Israel's. Okay, so the Jewish sages, as they are called, means smart people, at some point after the return from exile, we really don't know. I mean, we have a tradition that says that Ezra and Nehemiah and Mordecai and Daniel, and I don't even know if that's possible, got together with all the elders, and they broke up the Torah into weekly readings that would go 12 months. And for some reason that makes me scratch my head, they did this first Torah portion go over 5 chapters. And there is so much in these 5 chapters, major issues to talk about, that we could talk about this and go easily 3 or 4 weeks. And then you got other Torah portions, like the very last one, which is 1 chapter, or I even think the second to the last one is only 1 chapter. And you're struggling with, like, how do I fill up an hour with this? But we always do. So, in any case, all that to say, we have a lot to talk about today. So let's just jump into Genesis chapter 1. And, of course, Genesis, the Hebrew name for that is Bereshit. Or if you do modern Hebrew, it would be Bereshit, means in the beginning. So that's a fitting place to start, isn't it? And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And one of the really interesting things to say about this chapter is it took God 6 days to make everything. I'm thinking about some, poor joke about God just needing all the time to do that or something, or what? I mean, he wasn't powerful enough to do it in a moment. So you got to ask the question, actually, why did God take, here in chapter 1, 6 days to make it? Yeah? Okay, so there's certainly a prophecy built in. So the comment was, a day is like 1,000 years. So it leads to this idea that it was developed in the understanding of Malachi chapter 4, that, and Psalms talks about it, and Peter quotes Psalm, the day is like 1,000 years, and that this leads to 6,000 years of man on earth, and then that millennial rest, 1,000 years of a Sabbath rest. But the reason why I bring Malachi up, of course, is because the reason they were looking for the Messiah when Yeshua came was because of Malachi chapter 4, which says, when the sun will rise with healing in its wings, and they understood that to be referring to the Messiah coming at the end of day 4. So good. So perhaps there's the end is declared from the beginning, and that playing a part in it. But as far as immediate application for the Israelites at Mount Sinai, right, that's the original audience, what are they hearing? I mean, maybe it's too obvious to just state out loud, but Mike?
Do all your work in 6 days and rest on the Sabbath.
A week is 7 days. And you may work 6 of those, and you must rest on the 7th. Because God needed to rest on the 7th day? No, he's all powerful. We just sang that. He is all powerful, and therefore did not need to rest. So it was a pattern for us, and we need it. Matter of fact, only 1 day, right? But we are required to one day. So 6 days we work. Now, Okay, let's go to this verse. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. Okay, it's chapter 1, verse 14. God says, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years. What's missing? Weeks. Right? You can't tell what's a week, what day you're on during the week just by looking at the stars or the moon or the sun. So he gives it to Israel right here, 7-day week. And not just Israel, but the nation. So he gives it to Adam. And Adam passed that along, which is why many nations had a 7-day week. And I know many of you are probably sitting there right now asking me to point out that the word seasons is not perhaps necessarily just the word seasons, but in Hebrew it is the word moedim, appointed times. Yeah, good. Okay, one thing that is very important to talk about, many of you who have been here know that I tend to have this apologetics agenda, and that is because I've been around in the church long enough to see what happens to believers who don't have strong apologetics. Apologetics does not mean I like to apologize. It means what? We're able to give an intellectual, well-articulated defense for the Scriptures, for the existence of God, for the Christian faith. And so there are different ways to read Genesis chapter 1. The most, I'll just say the most, face value reading is that God literally created the day, the earth and the heavens in 6 days. It was 6, perhaps 24-hour days, because it says evening and morning. But if I am talking to a American who has been raised to understand science, and I tell them that this is how things started, what do most atheists or non-believing Americans, what are they going to say about that? They're probably going to shut you down pretty quick. I mean, that's been my personal experience. You're shut down pretty quick. Sharon?
I remember, and I'm trying to remember even now what church I was attending. I've attended several different ones throughout my life. That this idea of the day, because days is 1,000 years,
yes.
In fact it was 6,000 years, not 6 days.
Good. So that is another explanation. Now, first of all, I'll be very careful here. What you believe, or what I necessarily believe or interpret this to mean, how it happened, is not dependent upon your salvation. It doesn't minimize or depower God. Again, when I am talking to somebody about this, I just need to say, hey, this is a possible way it happened. And I could present what Sharon said. Now, they'd still say 1,000 years is too little, right? They would say it needs to be millions of years or whatever. But all you guys say is, look, it could have been 24-hour days. It could have been 1,000-year days. It could have been, another explanation is there could have been gaps in between. There was a little 24-hour day, and then God let time go for that stuff to flourish, and then he did another 1-day part of creation. So there's gaps in between. And I would encourage you, if you are witnessing to somebody, is to not stand so dogmatically on your view of this. Rather, we need to move the discussion on to whether God exists. And if their holdup is Genesis chapter 1 says 24-hour days, then just say, it could be 24-hour days. But it could also be some of these other things. And I don't know. I wasn't there. We'll find out someday. But let's move on. Let's move back to maybe the cosmological argument, right? That's the first cause. Let's go back to the design argument. Let's go back to the moral argument. All these other arguments that show that God exists without this book. And so we can do that. My favorite one to use is the poetic argument. So if I were to say day 1, see, you guys are over here. If I were to say day 1, 2, and 3, day 4, 5, and 6, and we know that the Hebrews like to write in parallels. What was created on day 1? He said, let there be light. Well, what was created on day 4? I just talked about a minute ago. The sun, the moon, and the stars. Okay? What was created on day 2? He separated the waters and created an expanse. So he created the oceans and the sky. What was created on day 5? Fish and birds. Okay. What was created on day 3? We got the land, and then on day 3? No, 6. 6, we get the animals and man. And so we see very clearly that there's some funny parallels that go on, especially, I say funny because I think of let there be light, but then let there be sun and moon. So what was that light? I mean, you can easily go to Revelation and say it was the glory of God. But nonetheless, I think if you understand how Hebrews write, we see parallels all the time. And so I just like to look at this as a Hebrew parallelism perhaps, and I'm not going to die that these have to be literal 24-hour days. I'm not going to do it. Rather, I think these are instructions, as I said a minute ago, for work 6 days and rest on the 7th. Let me just pause right there and ask if there's any comments or questions. Okay. One other thing I want to bring up is this view that I do have a little bit of a problem with, and that is what's called theistic evolution. And if you hold that view, again, I'm not going to condemn you about it, but I have some problems with it because it sounds like we're trying to blur things a little too much. Evolution is trying to take a God out of the picture, right? Where we don't need him. It is all done by chance. And we go from a single cell something to human beings, and I can't see that happening. So I don't like that view. And if I look at, and I'm going to jump ahead just a second here, in chapter 2, verse 5, I think it takes away from this idea of too much time going on. It says, when no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up. Why? Because the Lord had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground. So then it talks about, it kind of sounds like it's all happened at once. At least the plants and the mankind. So it's really tough to wrestle with this. Evolution. 2 terms. Microevolution and macroevolution. We should be okay with microevolution. Where we want to draw the line is at macroevolution. Now the evolutionists will say, well, wait a minute, everything's microevolution eventually gets to this what you call macro. If you were in biology class, and I think everyone required to, you have 7 stratas to divide up life, right? You have the kingdom, you guys have to help me out, kingdom and phylum and class and order, and then you get to family. And then you got genus and species. But family is the one where I think we need to draw a line as far as microevolution goes. Now what would be a family? A family would be cats, dogs, right? You have this division. Now we know we can breed cats in a different genus and species, so we have no problem with that. But you can't go from a cat to a dog. And so if people want to talk about microevolution or evolution, so yes, I have no problem with that. It's just when you jump families where I say, where's the evidence for that? All right, any comments about that? I know we're going lightning speed through some of this, but again, there's just so much to talk about. This is the beginning of the book. Moses is telling Israel, how did we get in to this problem? How did we get in Egypt? Why are we now at Mount Sinai? What's the backstory? And he goes back to creation. And in this chapter, everything's about Elohim. Elohim. Okay? And we learn we have 1 week, 6 days of work. We also learned that the day starts with the evening, right? And then I also want to talk about verse 26. God has a conversation with someone. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. What do we do with that? Who's he talking to? Joey?
The two most common interpretations is either he's talking to the other parts of the Trinity,
Okay.
or he's talking to the angels and the other spirits he created in the likeness of God as well.
Okay. Good. What would the Jews say right today?
Probably the angels.
They would say the angels. They also say, and you didn't say this one, the most common one is the royal pluralistic, right? We don't talk about that much anymore, but kings in Europe would always say we when speaking of themselves because they are royalty. So they would say this is the royal we. But what would be the comeback to that? Well, they just took that from the Bible, right? They're what came first. So we got talking to the angels, the royal we. The Jews would also say, not the... Okay, they say both of those, but also God's talking to himself, like his heart. I'm not sure what to do with that. And then finally, he's talking to the earth. And the reason why they say that is because Adam was created from the dust of the earth. And yet so were the other animals, so I'm not sure. So those are the four answers that the Jews give, but I do believe it is talking about the Trinity. It's talking about, and I say that because were we made in the image of angels? We were made in the image of God. We were made in the image of God, and that is repeated throughout Scripture. It never says we are made in the image of God and of angels. It says we are made in the image of God and a little lower than the angels. So I think this is referring to, I agree with the traditional Christian interpretation. This is referring to the Trinity. And we also see in verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So we see the Ruach there, the Spirit of God, involved in creation. If I were to go to Hebrews chapter 1, I would see that Yeshua is the Creator. If I would go to Colossians chapter 1, and if you guys don't know these passages, memorize them, the location or write them down. Because they clearly state that Yeshua is the Creator. John chapter 1, Colossians chapter 1, Hebrews chapter 1. And in Hebrews and Colossians, it's not just that Yeshua is the Creator, but He's also the one that sustains it and holding it together. And if you think about that a little further, it's almost like if He were to stop being aware that you were here, you would cease to exist. Because God maintains creation through His power. And if He were to say, or to stop thinking, or to forget you exist, He can't do that, you would cease to exist because He sustains it. He sustains creation. Yeah, Mike.
It actually fits with the laws of thermodynamics. Just
Okay.
entropy.
Entropy, right.
Everything falls apart.
Yeah.
Everything falls apart. Look at our cars. They fall apart. But all of existence, the leaves on a plant, everything in existence, every molecule will fall apart if left with enough time.
Yeah. The laws of thermodynamics also say that the universe itself is slowly going towards what's called a heat death, where eventually, think about it, if we're in this room right here, and there's a pocket of cold air there and a pocket of hot air here, eventually it's going to equalize. And the universe is doing the same thing. And if God were to step back, the deist of you, if He were to step back from the universe and just let things go, eventually the universe would just be an even temperature and nothing would exist. No life would exist. It would die. And so God Himself, of course, will have to prevent that from happening. Okay, so I want to make sure that as we're going through this, that we're not just seeing, that we're making sure we're seeing Yeshua in this. Not just in chapter 1, but chapters, we'll get to the next couple chapters as well. Also, perhaps to encourage the idea of a multi-person God, not a multi-God, but a multi-person God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. But look at verse 27 of chapter 1. God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him, male and female, He created them. So you see where I'm going, don't you? That we have God creating man in His image, but it's dual. There's a multi-person in Adam. Not the person of Adam, but the mankind Adam. I am going to create man in my image, but to do that, I am making male and female. And a man by himself does not as fully represent the image of God as a male and female coming together in marriage. Amy?
That's really good too, because if you think of like man as in human, I am fully human, and you're fully human. But I'm female and you're male.
Yeah.
In the same way that Yeshua would be fully God.
Same way, Yeshua would be fully God, and the Father is fully God, but they're clearly different.
And I know we're two. I'm one person, you're one person. Then there's what's to come, which shows that we're actually one.
Right. So it says, I think it's in chapter 2, that He will leave His, verse 24, chapter 2, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one. Good. So I think that's one of the reasons God did things this way. One of them was to show that He is multifaceted. He's a multi-person. They are multi-person. Boy, that's a scary way to talk, right? All right. So how is it then? I brought up the image of God. How is it? So that's one aspect we represent the image of God, is that we're multi-person. Somehow the female represents part of God, and we can generalize what a female is, right? Talking about the stereotypical stuff that you can't talk about these days because it's politically incorrect. But you can also talk about what stereotypes of man, and we show how when they come together, they balance each other. And I say stereotypes because I know not everyone is the same, and that's okay. But let's talk a little bit more about what does it mean to be an image of God. Sharon?
Just the
Keep
whole
going.
man, woman, and everything else. 26, it says, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion. Good. Let them have to. So it's plural. Yeah. And so, actually, that verse answers one of the questions, but let's keep going. So how is it we are in the image of God? What differentiates us from a deer, from a lemur, from a capybara? What do you want me to say, elephant and rhino? What differentiates us, the rest of the animal kingdom? What do you guys think? No thinking today? Sharon? Well, animals really just have instinct. I mean, they know what they're doing, but they cannot make the same kind of decisions as man, and the most important one being whether we're going to follow Yahweh or our own sinful natures.
Okay, so you brought up two things. Mankind has a higher level of intellect, right? Let's also talk about reasoning. Now, we know that some animals reason. Matter of fact, sometimes we are just absolutely blown away at, say, how bees can communicate with their little shaking their tush, and they figure out, well, where's the nearest pollen? You're like, how do you guys communicate that? But look at how we can take over the world as far as our building and our arguing and I don't mean arguing in a bad way, reasoning. So not just intellect, but the second thing you said was our ethics and our morality, right? Animals, I mean, you think of some of the primates, they have some level of that, but not anywhere near what we are capable of. Amy?
I was going to say, along thinking of the theme of Genesis 1, I think there's a creativity.
Creativity, yes.
We like to create.
We do.
We don't create out of nothing.
Sure.
Like God did, but we still love to make things.
Yeah. And again, we do see animals do plenty of creating. Beavers make dams. Termites make their big old...
It's a higher level of.
But it's a higher level of creativity.
And it's not always functional, like creating music and literature
Yeah.
and the arts. You don't really see that in the animal kingdom.
Again, not to that level. You got the mockingbirds, which can do other things and whatever, but again, to the level that God created us to do. Yeah, good. Someone else? Okay. So those were what are called ontological ideas for the image of God. But there's also, who we are, our essence and our being. But we also have functional, functional attributes of being in the image of God. And one of them was right there in the verse that Sharon read, verse 26, that says, "Let them have dominion over the fish and the birds and the animals." So we are to rule, just as God rules. And we see this in chapter 2 played out, where Adam is told to do what? Name the animals, right? Where it says, God brought the animals to Adam to see what he would call them. Adam, what are you going to call them? Okay, well, that's its name. All right, tough question. Think about this. Let me phrase it this way. So, it's only Christians that are made in the image of God, right? Because we have the Holy Spirit, and therefore, some of you are chuckling. I mean, clearly you disagree with that. All right, let me phrase the question a different way. Can Caden be more in the image of God than, say, Mike?
Yes, because as we conform to his image, you become more like him.
Okay.
It's kind of like when I walk out on a football field, I'll put on the uniform with my team, and we're more in the same image. So if I'm on God's team, the more I dress like him, and not necessarily clothing, but the more I put on the attributes of my God, the more of his image I will show to the world.
Okay. But if it's the image I'm showing to the world, then what about the David Koreshes? What about the Hitlers? Do they have the image of God?
This is a perfect example of his mercy that he has towards us. The same spirit that's in someone like Hitler is the same spirit that's in us. It's like of us giving us so much leeway that he's allowing even the person that doesn't believe in him to have a part of him. Does that make sense?
Because the image of God is innate, right? It's part. Otherwise, I think most of you here have a problem with abortion. Am I right? Does a fetus have the image of God? It can't speak, can't think. It's just kind of a blob of cells. So the image of God would seem to apply across everyone, perhaps even equally. Mike, I think what you may have been talking about would be a person's character. And so we all can have a more or less godly character. But if we have a less image of God, then we have a problem when we get to Genesis chapter 9. And he says, you can't murder because man's created in the image of God. And we would say abortion is murder, and yet that person isn't thinking. I just call it a person. Can we even call it a person? And we say yes, because it's made in the image of God. And so what I want to stress is even unbelievers, even the Hitlers are made in the image of God. Because made in the image of God is not necessarily speaking to our character. Some of the things that Sharon, some of the others mentioned a couple minutes ago weren't character driven. We talked about we are able to reason, we're able to understand morality and ethics, creativity, even our level of speech and be able to communicate with each other. None of those are related to character. Rather, it's what separates us from the animal kingdom and how we're made in the image of God. Amy?
I think some of the confusion could be like there is a sense of morality that comes with being made in the image of God. But again, morality isn't only Christians,
Right.
Morality is mankind.
Yes.
Now, granted,
We don't agree.
degrees of that, but we see that throughout history, this sense of like, this is wrong and this is right, this is good and this is evil.
Yeah. We do. We can't agree, and then we call there's the technical term for someone who's amoral, in other words, doesn't believe there are morals and acts on them, we call them a psychopath, right? That there's a problem with their mind, their brain. Because almost all, I'll say atheists, believe that there is morals. Now they would say, who creates the morals? Society, civilization. And we are aspiring, and together we will come to perfect morality. But of course, every civilization that keeps climbing ends up destroying itself. And because you can't do it without God, it's destructive.
I was thinking about, was it
It said, about talking to God, like cursing your brother or something like that, and how could you like love God?
Yeah, good.
Not somebody who's made like God or in the image. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, you got both 1 John talks about that, and I think James talks about that. You can't, same spring, both fresh water and salt water. Or you can't say, I love God and yet hate my brother. So, yeah, good. Mike?
It would be me loving my wife. I love my wife, but every time I see her picture, I curse at her.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't fit. Good.
Just that brought up a question. I, in my life, have known several people who absolutely were, not saved, no God involved kind of a thing, that were probably, literally some of the nicest, most generous, they're, the world would view them as being really good people. They were moral, they were kind, all those things, but they had no belief in God.
Because our morals aren't required to believe in God. That's not what we have to, how do I say this? Yeah, it's a mankind attribute. But the moral argument says, without God, we can't have absolute morals. Absolute morals. What's an absolute moral? It is always wrong to torture a little baby for fun. We would agree that is always wrong. That is an absolute moral. Or an absolute duty. A duty would be, you're walking by the kiddie pool in a public place, a public pool, and in the kiddie pool, and there is an 11-month-old baby in the 2-foot deep water, 18 inches. I think those are really deep, but it's drowning. So you have the objective duty to step in there and save the child, right? That would be an objective duty. And the reason why I chose such is because there's no danger to you. It's not like you have to swim out a mile in the ocean to save someone who's drowned there, because you would probably die too. So there are absolute morals and duties. And you can't say that that's rooted in civilization, because civilizations will agree that, choose Nazi Germany, choose apartheid South Africa. What did those civilizations arrive at as absolute morals? Racism, or not racism, but genocide. Thank you, genocide, right? And so, without God, there are no absolute morals. You have to root it in something, and we root it in the character of God, because society will always end up going the wrong way. It will end up going to genocide. All right, any other comments on that? That's some pretty harsh stuff. Yeah, Mitzi.
Ancient China did not save people's lives because they figured their fate was to die, and if you saved them, then you had to take care of them for the rest of their life.
Huh. Wow, so that's how they got around that. Yeah. If you save someone's life, you now have the burden of providing for them, caring for them. So therefore, let them die and go on to the great nirvana or whatever. Yeah, someone else. That's India, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. And we already talked about Nazis and apartheid, and there's always been cultures that have gone the wrong direction. All right, Amy?
But the thing is that if there are no absolute moral values, then we can't condemn any of that. We can't say, oh, that's wrong that ancient China did that. We can't say it's wrong that there was genocide in these countries.
Good, yeah.
Because they came up with their morals and lived by them. But if there are absolute values, then we can say,
Good.
no, that was a wrong decision.
Right, let me rephrase that. So if you're talking to someone, they say to you there's no absolute morals or duties, and you say, well, then it's okay if I steal your car, if I take your car. And they say, well, no, it's not. And you say, well, why? I mean, you just told me there's no absolute morals, and my moral says it's okay for me, I want your car, I'm going to take it. Or they say, well, our country says it's illegal. Okay, well, let me go to another country and I take it. Are you saying that's okay for me to do there? You push it, and they're going to realize, well, actually, I don't believe that. I believe there are absolute morals. And that has to be rooted in something. Good. All right. So anything else in chapter 1? Anything you guys want to say about creation there? I'm going to talk about eating stuff, vegetation, etc. I'm going to talk about that here either next week or the week after, so I'm going to pass on that for right now. How about this? What's the very first command in the Bible? Be fruitful and multiply. And now, when you think about older China, I think is it still, they don't still have the one child per family, do they?
It's 2.
It's now 2? All right, but it used to be, I mean, most of us were kids, we always knew China was only allowed to have 1 kid, right? But here, God's command is a blessing from God to have a large family. But now, some of us, I think the Harses, you've been looked at before for maybe having too many kids and going to restaurants. Woo, 4 kids! Oh, you're that carbon burden on the planet. I don't know. You guys should, again, the Western society has said procreation needs to stop or diminish because we are overburdening the planet. In other words, our society honestly worships the planet, worships Earth. But God says otherwise. I bless you with many kids. Cheryl?
But what's hidden from people is the fact that science has proven that if a culture does not have a 2.1% growth population rate, that society will cease to exist.
Yeah.
The United States is at 0.81%.
Yep, with the exception of all the
With the exception of the Muslims, who have 8 children
immigrants.
per family.
Yeah.
They're the only people in the entire world that are actually following the fruitful and multiply right now.
Yeah.
It used to be the Catholics.
Used to be the Catholics.
The Catholics had big families.
Yeah. Joey?
And that fear arises because people living in a materialistic culture
Yes.
don't recognize that something greater is coming.
Yes.
And it will be sustainable, and it will provide for us.
That's right.
What hope does the materialistic person have for the planet that's going to be destroyed?
But I need the iPhone 13.
What does the media always talk about? They keep saying we have limited resources on this earth. We have limited resources. We need to go explore Mars and other planets to get more resources. And when you're very materially focused and saying we only have this much, then it's like, okay, well, I don't want to share as much. So you guys stop having so many kids. We're going to kill this earth. What's that? South Dakota? Yeah. And so God says just the opposite. He says, fill the earth. And if you live for God, He blesses and provides. And those limited resources become unlimited. Water and food. All right, we're going to get here next week. Water, unlimited. It fills the whole earth. But He's the one who gives and He takes away. And of course, as America continues to run from His ways, we will see our resources diminish. Okay, anything else on that? No. Okay. Okay, we'll talk about that next week. Good. Okay, we talked about Shabbat. Chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his creation, all his work that he had done in creation. So, do we want to do that? Do we want to imitate God? Did he really need a rest? We're not doing Exodus this year, so I'll ask the question now that I always ask when we see Shabbat. When we keep the Shabbat, we proclaim what? Joey?
Covenantly made God.
We are covenantly made, and
The covenant we made, or God made with us, we proclaim the covenant by obeying the Sabbath.
yes, but more specifically, what was right here in chapter 1 is
That he's the creator.
the Creator, right? And so in Exodus, almost every time he says keep Sabbath, it says because I created. And so when you're keeping the Sabbath, you're saying, yes, you're the Creator. And it also says keep the Sabbath because, what's the second reason? Deuteronomy?
The Redeemer who redeemed us out of Egypt.
Because I brought you out of Egypt. And so when you keep the Sabbath, you proclaim you are my Redeemer. And when you don't keep the Sabbath, perhaps it can be inferred then, especially if you don't keep the Sabbath, you're saying you're not the Creator and you're not my Redeemer. Once you understand what Scriptures are saying, and you say, no, I'm not going to keep the Sabbath, now you understand why it was a capital punishment. The God of the Bible is not the Creator. He's not your Redeemer. And it's like you're shaking your fist at Him. So that was a capital punishment. And now you can understand why. Sure.
Many people, including our families, that are not doing that.
Right, and that's why I say once you become convinced. Because there is that ignorant factor. So Israel had no excuse. But now, many of us here were raised in the church where we were taught Sunday was the Sabbath. And keeping that Sabbath was even kind of wishy-washy because I still went shopping and I still did homework and whatever else. And so, Yeshua says you will be judged for what you know. But once you come into the Scriptures and you're digging into this and you're saying, wow, I really think we're supposed to do all 10 commandments, now there's that, I won't say burden, but it's more of a joy of keeping the Sabbath. I mean, who here would still call the Sabbath a burden? I mean, it's a joy to keep, right? To rest, to not wake up as early and to say, I'm not cooking, and then reheat, make your sandwich, whatever else you're going to do, and then to come to church with fellow believers and discuss the Word, and it is a joy. Okay. I already read that. Go ahead, Amy.
I was also thinking it's not something that we need because we're fallen or, we're broken and so we need a rest day. Like this is pre-fall. God creates and then he says rest and he models that. So if there's something good about Sabbath even among perfect beings, makes me wonder, will we always have that habit?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's like so good because a lot of times people say, well, Jesus is my rest. Like, but if it was created before there was even sin, then.
All right, you guys went there, so I'll skip there because that's part of my discussion. What happened? What institutes were in place before sin came into being? Nope, I don't want to say that. That was bad phrasing. Before Adam and Eve sinned. We have the Sabbath prior to the fall. We also have marriage prior to the fall. And what I was about to read is work. So guess what? The movies portray heaven as, hell. Okay? I'll be honest. When I see the clouds and people just kind of wandering around with their harps, totally bored, people, and in the movies, they go to hell, but there's fighting going on, and there's adventures where they're like, I don't want to go to hell, I don't want to go to heaven. Movies totally flip that around. They want you to desire hell and not heaven, because heaven's boring. You're not going to do anything because everything's taken care of. A good story has a plot. It has a problem to solve. There's no problem in heaven. Okay, but here we see there is work to do. Adam was given, the garden says, you go and take care of it. He was given the animals, go and name them. And so he was caring for it. So when we get to heaven, guess what? You have work to do. But that work is going to be a source of joy. Just like perhaps, the artist who's paid to do their artwork, right? But they have a hard time selling their artwork because they just loved making it so much, but they're going to get $1 million for it so that they sell it. I love to make it. I love my work. I love my art. Whatever it is, right? And so when we get to the next life, you will have a lot to do. And Yeshua says, you will reign with me. You will rule with me. And you will not be bored. It will be such an overwhelming source of joy. And so we have these three institutions in place before the fall. And that's important to keep in mind. Amy?
Not an institution, but there's also food before the fall.
So you're going to eat and drink. Yes.
That sounds exciting.
It is. That's part of celebration, right? It's how God says to celebrate. Celebrate by eating and drinking. And that continues in Revelation, in heaven, in the millennium. Okay, but then we're about to get to the work part. So in verse 18, it says, it is not good for that man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. Now out of the ground the Lord had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens, to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. And he says, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman. Okay, so, a couple things. This woman is his helper, right? So that means man is the head of the house, woman is there to help him out. Submit. Okay, I actually don't believe that. And the reason why is because the word helper there, while in English it has a subjective connotation, did you know that same title, same word is used of God in his role with Israel? And so if God can be called Israel's helper, and clearly he does not submit to Israel, then a wife can be called a helper without requiring her to submit to her husband. Now, a perfect marriage is going to be a best friendship where there is not this role of, I say so, so you do it. I don't care if it's man, woman, man, or whatever. It's just going to be, hey, we're good friends, and hey, what do you want to do in this situation? What do you think about this? There's discussion, and there is group decision, group being the two of you, that decide together. Cheryl?
In my notes, I have a man's wife is to be the counterpart in order to help him. And the picture that we were able to grasp here is that a man's wife was to be the one who is in front of the husband in the sense of a mirror of him in order to help him see how he looks.
Interesting.
You have a, colorblind.
Yeah, right. She can help me out with that. So, if you do want those scriptures where God is called the helper, you can write these down. Genesis 49:25, Exodus 18:4, Deuteronomy 33:7, and still in Deuteronomy 33, it's also verse 26 and 29. So several places there where God is called Israel's helper. Joey?
So when we look at Paul's letters, and I know there's more of a patriarchal sort of dominance in his writings. Are we looking at that more of like the culture? are we still because like he says stuff like, well, women shouldn't preach and something they shouldn't do.
Women shouldn't speak up in church, and how many women here have raised their hands today, right?
Right. So like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should do anything. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
should we look at those letters from the culture and perspective they're written in, and not more or less they were like command, like he was like that God, not God
Right.
saying that, it's, Paul.
Right. Would you say Paul was allowed to add to the Torah?
No.
Okay. So obviously you brought up a discussion that is a bigger discussion. So just tipping my hat, I would say yes, culture is playing a large part in much of that.
I just wanted that confirmed.
Yeah. Good. Go ahead, Jen.
Well, I was just going to say too, but we can also see in Paul's writing that he refers to women as, he refers to them as elders. I know.
In Romans chapter 16, there is one that a very strong case can be made that she's called a apostle.
And then there's, he refers to them as prophets, and
Yep.
that they have assemblies taking place in their homes. So we can see, you just have to, they're not as obvious that he does also hold women up, as equal.
Yeah.
But it's not as obvious as the women should never be
Right.
ever.
So Yeshua was the strongest women's rights activist of the first century. And women were extremely subjugated in the first century among Jews, the Jewish culture. Women couldn't be a witness; they weren't allowed to speak. If there was 100 women in the room and one man walked in, it was now a masculine crowd. So what he did, treating women almost as equals as men, was phenomenal. And when you read through the Gospels, you will see what a significant role women play in there. And that was just bizarre if you read other stuff that's going on at that time. The first person who he revealed he was Messiah to was the woman at the well. The first person who saw him resurrected was Mary. I'm forgetting another one, but you see that it was a really big deal. I did answer, okay. And he also, there's women that supported his, financially, they were rich and they supported his ministry. They paid his way, and also for Paul. So women took a huge role in that, and it was very unusual. Yeah, Sharon?
When I was Pentecostal, and the church we went to, which I learned as I was there, because I didn't really know anything about Pentecostal, was very liberal for a Pentecostal church. And we had the gal that led the worship and all the singing and all, and we had a new family come in, and after a couple of weeks, they made a very passionate, speech about they weren't coming back because women were not supposed to. And she wasn't like preaching even. She was just leading, the song and worship time, and they just, were horrified.
Sure, and we will find that there's several things, I won't say lots of things in Scripture that seem to be clear that people take a strong stance on that maybe should be softer. Let's pick it. No. I guess we're careful about using examples because it could hurt or step on toes. So I won't. Okay, so back to the naming of the creatures. So we see the example of him having this authority role, the image of God. We talked about the marriage and women. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. And of course, that then leads into chapter 3, which I really want to get through this today. Because, remember, we are answering Israel's question of, how did we get in this mess? What are we doing here right now at Mount Sinai? And so Moses is giving them the backstory from the beginning. With Adam and Eve, everything was perfect. We had a garden. A major theme in Torah is the word rest. A major theme is the word rest. And that is because Israel was a nation of slaves. And so rest is something that they've longed for. Rest is in a right relationship with God. There's no hostility. You have peace. You're provided for. And so that's something they've been longing for. And we see it in the garden. And then we come to chapter 3. So how do we lose this? And so the serpent comes. And where's the word? Well, where's the word? Okay, so John 13. So God says, they ate from the tree, and the woman, and he says, what happened? Why'd you do this? And it says, the serpent deceived me. Now think about this. Adam and Eve. Have they ever heard someone tell a lie before? Can you imagine the question that might be going through their heads? Why would you say something that's not true? If there's never been a lie told before that they've heard, because they've only spoke to each other, to God, if this is like Narnia, maybe they're speaking to the other animals, who knows? And now someone told me something that wasn't true. Well, why shouldn't I have believed him? He deceived me. I don't even know what the word deceived means, but it's in my vocabulary now. Not to, give Eve an excuse, but I was thinking about that this week. Like, wow, did she ever hear a lie before? Now, the tree that's in the middle of the garden, how many trees are there that are special? The tree of knowledge of good and evil. But there's another one that we rarely talk about, and that's the tree of life is there too. And they were told not to eat of one of those, but not the other one. And the lie, well, it's not necessarily a lie, that Satan told, or the serpent said, was, you will be like God. What's the irony there? They already were. They were created in the image of God, and Satan said, or the serpent says, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. They already were in the image of God. And the serpent was not. Cheryl, did you have a comment?
I think about that verse a lot. Like, you see the truth. It's like he's almost presenting like a lie that they were already. And it was like, I guess she realized she wanted to be like God, but she already was. And it's like, I don't know. It's just a weird. It's weird how the person said it.
He's a good liar, isn't he?
Oh my God.
He's a good liar. Cheryl?
So I was raised in a church that basically was constantly down talking women because women are the reason why this world is messed up. And I remember having a conversation with my mom years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And we were talking about this, and I go, Mom, where was Adam?
Right there.
Somewhere in the garden. No, but Mom, where was Adam?
Yeah.
Somewhere in the garden.
Go read it.
Mom, read this. Where was Adam? Next to her. I never saw that.
Yeah. Yeah, so Adam didn't speak up. The woman may have been deceived, but Adam went along with it. Was he deceived too? Or did he just say, well, she did it. Still alive. I guess I'll do it. And the day you eat of it, you will die. Did God lie? Did they die that day? If you take a day as 1,000 years, and how long did Adam live? I think it's 930. That sounds right to me too. It's 930 years, so he didn't quite make it over a full God day. Can I say God day?
I would thought of it more like spiritually.
And that would play a role in as well. That they.
That day you begin.
Yeah. Well, there's a spiritual death and there's a physical death because he kicked him out of the garden. Why did he kick him out of the garden? So he wouldn't eat from the other tree of life and live forever. Verse 22. Now, lest you reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. That's why they're exiled. So again, already Israel has seen the theme. Obey God, blessing, and you get a stay and rest. You disobey, exile. Those themes are all the way at the very beginning of Genesis. All right, Amy?
Could it also be for the youth will surely die? Like, yes, spiritual death, but like right now our bodies are dying, right? Like they're headed towards the grave.
Yep.
And that wasn't the case before Adam and Eve sinned. They were constantly healthy and wonderful. And so that would be the day that they begin to head towards.
Could be. Another theory I read is that if they ate from the tree of life, it kept them immortal. And so if they had remained and they kept eating from the tree of life, then they would have not died. But once they stopped eating from that daily or weekly or however often, then they began to die. There's these trees with different properties, right? You got in Revelation, you got the tree whose fruit, or no, sorry, not the fruits, the leaves, I think, provide healing for the nations. And it seems like, well, that might be a metaphor, but, well, according to Genesis, some of these trees that God created might not necessarily be metaphor, but literal with these properties. Okay. Oh, I want to talk about this. Okay, so the curses. We got to talk about the curses as much as we don't want to talk about the curses. So the Lord said that the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So, here we have, at the moment of crisis, what do we have?
Salvation.
We have hope. We have salvation, right? There is this hint of a prophecy of the Messiah coming and destroying the serpent, destroying Satan, taking and fixing everything. Verse 16, to the woman, and you going to say something else about that?
Yeah, what is these serpents?
Good. Let's talk about that. Now's the time for that. So this actually introduces another theme that's going to go through the whole rest of the Bible, and that is the theme of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. When we get to Cain and Abel, right, we have a righteous son and a wicked son, and the wicked son rises up and conquers and kills Abel, but then we have Seth, and Seth is able to continue the righteous seed. And when we get to all the generations, and we're following the firstborn son of the righteous seed. And that ultimately ends with Abraham. The reason why I'm kind of hesitant with why am I hesitant with that? Because we skip from essentially Shem, right? So we see the priesthood get passed on from Shem to Abraham if Melchizedek is Shem. Yeah. And so when we get to Pharaoh, what does Pharaoh do? He says, take all the baby boys and throw them into the Nile. When we come to Yeshua, Herod says, take all the baby boys who are under the age of 2 and kill them. When we have Israel disobeying, we have these wicked beast empires. We talk about Egypt, we got Babylon and Assyria, we've got Persia, we've got Greece, we've got Rome, right? We've got all these nations that Daniel talks about and Revelation talk about, trying to wipe out the seed, which is a little bit metaphorically talked about in Revelation chapter 12. Is that what you want me to say? Or is
Well, like the mothers obviously the righteous. So is that the opposite of the serpent seed being wicked?
Okay, so there's no literal serpent seed, right?
I wasn't. Yeah, it's not like.
It's a spiritual. Whose heart does he twist? Well, what did God say to Cain? Sin is crouching at your door. Either you let it in or you rule over it. And Cain let it in. So that's how Ephesians talks about the kingdom of darkness. Who's your king? And the kingdom of Yeshua. So you have two kingdoms. Yeah. Okay, so, but I want to keep going. Yeah? All right, go ahead.
How did Persia try to wipe out the seed of the righteous?
Is there a specific example? It's just that they were ruling over the land. I don't think I have a specific example unless someone can help me out here. Oh, well, what's it? Oh, good, Haman. Yeah, that was Persia. Good, so Haman said, kill all the Jews. That was a good one. Yeah,
But
so...
the king didn't, when protected them all though. And he kind
Well,
of-
initially, the king is the one who said, go for it, until he found out that Esther was a Jew.
Right, okay.
And then he said, oh, you put me in the pickle.
Right, okay.
Okay, good. And then, of course, Greece was, I forgot his name. Epiphanes? Antiochus Epiphanes, yes. And then Rome, of course, did its thing. So, yeah, it's all these. Okay, but let's keep going because time's running out, and I really want to get to the curses. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Okay, who has something different? Yeah, probably about all of you, huh?
Yeah.
Sharon, go ahead.
It says,
Your desire.
Thy desire shall be to thy husband.
Okay, good.
And he shall rule over you.
Good. So the wording here is literally for your husband, but the idea is that it's contrary. And let me give you an example, because we have the exact same language in Hebrew in next chapter 4, verse 7, where God says to Cain, if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but again, my translation says contrary to you, but you must rule over it. So we have the same Hebrew there. So there is this battle that's going on. We battle against sin, and of course in our relationships we tend to battle because we are selfish creatures. But it's when we can live with a godly character that our relationships are good, and our hardest relationship is going to be the one that you are the closest to, right? And that, if you're married, is going to be your marriage. And then you can also have really close relationships with parents and child, and there's other ones. But the closer you get, it tends to be you are the most vulnerable with, and it can be the hardest and most raw relationship. And so we have to fight to have a good marriage. I just realized how that could be interpreted. We have to fight to have a good marriage, but rather we have to fight ourselves to have a good marriage. Cain had to fight himself to rule over sin. We must fight ourselves to have a good marriage, but also to rule over sin. And so I kind of like, it's not just the ESV, but also the NET, which is a very good translation that uses the translation of the contrary there. So it's not literal, but that's the idea that is there. Cheryl?
My notes say that we see from these words that the woman's desire is to be in the position of the man and try to assume leadership. That the man was at this point now established at the head of the home, and we see throughout every generation a growing tendency for the woman to try to assume the leadership of the man, kind of like feminism.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I think this is just two different ways of saying the same thing. They're each trying to rule. I don't think the desire is to be the husband or have his position, but that there's going to be this emotional battle of the wills. Same thing that we all experience in any relationship that is very close. And again, then comparing it with the exact same language in the next chapter, I don't think Cain is trying to take sin's place. Rather, we must fight to have good relationships. And again, I'm not a strong patriarchal in the marriage.
Well, I've seen a lot of marriages where the wife is basically taking headship and she treats the husband like a piece of crap.
And I've seen a lot of marriages where the husband's the head, and it's the same way, right? So it's the same thing where, can we use the term mutual headship? I guess it's kind of what Ephesians talks about, is this mutual submission and mutual headship where, well, the man's the source or the head, but why does there have to be someone in charge in a marriage?
It was proven in the fact that the woman, if she makes a the vow, he has 24 hours from the time period that he hears the vow to
Good.
disavow that.
Good. And again, my explanation for that was the inheritance goes from the father to the sons. So the physical possessions belong to the males, to the men. And so when you make a vow, it involved the physical possessions back in that time. I know it sounds a little silly, but God, if you do what I say, give me what I want, then I'll give you 3 cows or whatever. And so it involved giving away the husband's wealth. And so he says, whoa, 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 you just said what now? And so he can override that. Or he could let it stand. And yet you see, I think, a healthy marriage in the Proverbs 31 woman, where you don't see this, where you see the man giving the freedom, if you will, to the woman of, hey, go consider a field and purchase it if you think it's good. But everything belonged to the men. And I don't know if in that culture, thank you. In that culture, and again, I think that was how things developed. And I think it's similar in line with the polygamy, with the slavery. In other words, this is the way cultures were developed at that time. He says, this is how things are going to be, so you must polygamize. If you're going to do it, it has to be done this way. If you're going to divorce, it's got to be done this way. If you're going to have slaves, it's got to be in this way. If you're going to take women from battle, it's got to be in this way. You have to wait the 30 days and pare the fingernails, etc. And so it's not his ideal, but he's setting some boundaries. I mean, all those things I just listed, right? Those aren't things that we necessarily like right now. And we don't have to live that way in our culture. You guys understand what I'm saying? I don't, but we can talk more about it. What's that? About he'll rule over you? Yeah. Right, so that is not... Look, anyone who hears someone's going to rule over you, how do you hear that? How do you like that? I wouldn't like that. Wait a minute. I have a semi-decent brain. I think I can make some good decisions. What do you mean he's going to rule over me? Amy?
Also, just telling what's going to happen.
A prophecy, a curse, yeah.
No, I don't mean, like, now that we have the fall, you're going to be trying to conquer your husband, and he's going to be ruling over you. Not he should rule over you, he shall rule over you.
Yeah, and also could be, if you guys get in a fight, I have made man be stronger than woman. Right. Generally speaking, physically stronger, and he will submit you.
This is just a future this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Not like this is God's perfect plan.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's not like this is the punishment and the curse I'm giving you. It's like this is what's going to happen.
Okay, Cheryl?
So it sounds like what Amy's saying is that prior to the fall, it was an equal goose gander type of scenario.
Yeah.
After the fall, it went.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not just one way. I think it kind of flip-flops, and it's this battle going on. She's fighting, he's fighting, and so there has to be this maturity, this character that develops and growth. Joey? Okay, go ahead.
When we're with this, like the way we function, the way Eric and I function is like we'll talk it through and what do you think? Or sometimes we'll be like, hey man, this is I even tell the kids sometimes, Mom, what do you think? I'm like, that's Dad's domain. Go ask him. And he'll have things where he's like, go ask Mom.
Yeah.
Because
we've split some things up. Yeah.
And other things we talk it through until we figure it out together. But it's not like you always get to decide or I always get to decide.
No.
I think that might have been what it could be like with Adam and Eve. I mean, we're not perfect. They were. But that
and it shows, I think, this mutual respect, this mutual love for each other. I respect her wisdom in areas, she respects mine, and it works well. Because we used to, in our early marriage, we used to do the traditional church position, and I don't think it worked out very well.
Other than your dominant personality, that helps.
Well, yeah, but you were trying to be, I think, too submissive in some areas. All right, we got to finish this though. So the next one is Adam. You're going to have, curse in and the ground and all the work of your brow. But let's keep going. Verse 20. The man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all the living. And the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skin and clothed them. So I didn't read this, but remember, they made fig leaf clothing. And now it says God made them clothing out of skins. Why is this important? Well, you guys have probably been here long enough, so tell me. They had to be sacrificed. And notice, what's clothing do? It covers you. And so sin requires blood. Sin requires a blood covering. And so even here, for the second time in this chapter, I think we see a pointer to Christ, to the death of the Messiah that is necessary for atonement. We cannot have a restored relationship with God without Yeshua. The other thing I needed to say, and I didn't, back in chapter 2. Chapter 1 talks about creation. And what's the name of the God in chapter 1? It's Elohim. But then in chapter 2 we get creation story all over again, different details, but now we know that this is the God, Yehovah, Yahweh, insert your pronunciation there. And the reason why that's important is because Israel is now hearing, your God is the God who did all of creation. The creation story is extremely similar to the creation story of Egypt, to the story of Babylon. So what they are going to notice is what's different. And what was different was a 7-day week. All of man is made in the image of God, not just Pharaoh. And that there's only one God, even if he has multiple persons in the Godhead there. But then there's not this pantheon of gods that are fighting amongst each other, and there's a God of hell, and the God of heaven, the sky, and the God of the crops, and the God of fertility, and God of everything else. That is what's different. It's the Hebrew God, 7-day work week, and we are all made in the image of God. And I think, even though we're ending late, that's where we're going to have to end for this week. There's some really major topics, but this is the beginning of not just Israel's story, but our story. And why we're sitting here today is because of these first 3 chapters.